The Judgment Hall is one of the most iconic moments in Undertale. Near the end of your journey, after walking through Asgore's house and hearing the sobering tale of Asriel and the first fallen human, you expect to come face to face with the critical boss monster himself. Instead, you find a strange golden hall, technically labeled the Last Corridor, where you come face to face with Sans, of all monsters. The first monster you met outside the ruins and who shows up a few times throughout a run. And, of course, in the No Mercy route, the Judgment Hall is where the famous Sans boss battle goes down. In Deltarune, there is a place that oddly parallels the Judgment Hall. It's not at the end of the game this time, that'd be pretty hard to prove considering the end is not yet out, but rather the second location that Chris is in, the school. Of course, the similarities between the two don't make themselves known until the end of Chapter 1. As Chris walks through the school, there is the same light streaming in through the windows, tiled yellow floors, and even the same sound of birds singing. I first found out about this from a post made by A Little Harder Than That on Tumblr, and with her permission, I'm making a video on this. I'll be linking her post with her thoughts in my description, and I highly recommend checking it out, as she goes into a lot on not just the physical similarities between the two locations, but also other ways that they are similar. One thing that I find particularly interesting is that in Undertale, while it is framed so that you see the windows, in Deltarune, you can only see the lights streaming from the windows. In Undertale, your time in the Judgment Hall feels momentous. However, in Deltarune, it feels quiet. Perhaps a little lonely, but also perhaps a little nice, a little peaceful. Now, this Judgment Hall parallel obviously brings up the very big question. Why? Well, for one thing, it nicely lines up with a theory I've been tossing around, that the bosses and worlds in Deltarune somewhat reverse parallel Undertale. I'll hopefully go into this in more detail in a future video, but for now let's just say that in Chapter 1 you fight a king, where the final boss in Undertale is a king, and in Chapter 2 you fight Spamton, who is similar to the second to last boss, Metaton, Neo and everything. So the Judgment Hall being near the castle makes sense. And this could be seen as just further building that parallel. Ignoring the reverse parallel theory, though, what else could this mean? I don't think it's just trying to remind you of Undertale for no reason. This isn't a subtle reference, nor one that should be made carelessly, considering the weight that comes with it. Well, seeing as the Judgment Hall was relevant at the end of Undertale, I believe that one of the final moments before the end in Deltarune will be in the school as well. This guess, of course, is hardly surprising. The Castletown Dark World is where we keep returning to, and it's clear that it and its special Dark Fountain are going to be incredibly important and relevant for the rest of the story and the ending. These two halls on either side of the door are paths towards it then, or away from it. I can easily see us exiting from the closet and needing to go to either side and being confronted for one reason or another. Or vice versa, where one exits a side room and is confronted by someone standing in front of the closet. We can also rule out that the right door will be relevant. We know that all that is in there is a now empty classroom. The door on the left, however, is still a mystery to us, the one unknown door in the school. The lights from the windows also line up better on the left than on the right. On the right, the lights end up hitting the door, while on the left, they're perfectly spaced out between the two doors. Personally, I think the confrontation will be while trying to get to the unknown room. If there's a door that leads to the closet from the old school room, it stands to reason that the other one will have a closet door too, and a closet door that will lead to the other side of the closet dark world, the side with all the creepy Titan Eye imagery that we can't get to anymore. Now, what does the Judgment Hall represent? It's a moment of reflection. At the beginning of Undertale, you are told that the world is kill or be killed, and the Judgment Hall reveals how much you bought into that ideal, how well you listened to those telling you that sparing was the correct way to proceed. It is also, in the extreme case, a place where you are met with your final opposition, and your determination to continue on your chosen path is tested. Well, where better to be tested than a school, I suppose. So, what are you being judged for in Deltarune? Well, the hallway could be another moment of reflection like it was in Undertale. In Undertale, Sans explains what love and EXP represent. I don't think that will be retread in Deltarune, as level seems to be a different thing. In Chapter 1, you're level 1, in Chapter 2, you're level 2, no matter what actions you took. Will there be another acronym with a secret hidden evil? Only time will tell. Anyway, what are the actions that you do that might warrant being judged? First, obviously, is whether you're fighting or sparing enemies. While this doesn't have the same amount of weight that it does in Undertale, it does still have some importance to it, as it's how Castletown is built up and expands. There is also the Snowgrave route, by far the most heinous action in the game, and some have theorized that similar routes will be possible in future chapters. Perhaps it is here that Chris and the player will be confronted with the victims of their control, and the effect that it has had on them afterwards. And of course there's the rule: your choices don't matter. Many of these previous things can relate to making an effort to prove whether or not you do or don't have a choice. And it could also be openly questioned how much of your actions were choices, either on Chris's part or on your part as the player. If there is a physical confrontation in this hall, it could be interesting to see how fights would work or change being in the light world as opposed to the dark. That's assuming that, being as late in the game as it would be, and so close to Castletown, there isn't some sort of darkness overtaking the light world that would allow access to the dark world battle system. Now, finally, the big question. Who would be the judge in this scenario? In Undertale, Sans was the judge. He seemed to have the ability to read your love and EXP, though it's not clear if this was a power that all monsters have or if he was special in some way. I'm personally partial to the former. He was a seemingly harmless character before, and didn't seem particularly important. That being said, while brainstorming who would be a good judge, I sort of kept in mind the example that Sans set, but for me, much more important was how interesting the interaction would be. Alright, who are our judges? I've listed them here from least to most likely. First, Sans! You loved him the first time, surely we'll love him the next time. In all seriousness, he's so far the character least changed from his appearance in Undertale, with weird enough stuff going on with him that I can easily see him continuing his oddly meta weirdness, and being the judge again. That being said, it doesn't seem likely or as interesting as some of the other candidates, so I'm just gonna move right along. Candidate 2, Birdly. Okay, wait, hold on. Is he the best judge character? No, far from it in fact. But, especially in regards to the Snowgrave route, I think having one of the victims be the one to confront Chris would be an interesting idea. How would he wake up post-Snowgrave? I don't know, but let's just say for fun that he does. He would be the person who has seen firsthand the actions Chris and the player have taken, how they have manipulated people, and been on the bad end of that kind of attack. In a pacifist playthrough, however, he would be lacking in anything to really judge you for, so that's why he's so far down on this list. Up next, Noelle. While not fitting perfectly, she could be good for a confrontation. Even if there are Snowgrave-like routes in other chapters, Noelle is still the first victim of it, and will have spent the most time dealing with the guilt, paranoia, and other emotions that come from being manipulated like that. In some scenes, she seems to even begin to understand that there is something more going on than just Chris. The confrontation could then gear more towards confronting the player for their choices. Like with Birdly, however, Noelle lacks as much punch without the Snowgrave route. She could still be interesting to represent how much you have helped people, I suppose, but there's still other people who would make a better and more interesting judge. Next up, Papyrus. Why Papyrus? Well, we haven't seen him yet, maybe they're saving him for the judgment scene. Unlikely, as I hope, Papyrus will show up before the supposed judgment scene, which I imagine will be near the end of the game. This makes most sense if Papyrus has made Dark Worlds before, Papyrus Knight theory or not. It would give him more of a first-hand kind of experience to judge Chris from. That being said, I mostly like this idea for the parallel it brings between Undertale and Deltarune, having one of the skeleton brothers be the judge. Susie judging you for your actions is pretty unlikely, seeing as since she's such a main character for Deltarune, it's not surprising to see her somewhere. However, she would be in an interesting place to judge Chris from, as she has seen Chris all throughout the game from start to end. Being previously a bully solving battles with violence, she would also be in an interesting place to judge Chris from in that regard, especially if the playthrough has been one geared towards violence. It could also be Susie realizing something is either wrong with Chris and confronting them about that, or learning about Snowgrave-like actions and confronting them about that. We'd also get a neat parallel to the first time you meet Susie, a confrontation in the school halls. Is it clear yet that I'm a big sucker for parallels? Next up is the other part of the Deltarune trio, Ralsei. Of course, the problem with the Ralsei confrontation in the school hallway is that, well, it's in the school and not a dark world. And Ralsei, being a Darkner, shouldn't be able to exist outside of a dark world. Ralsei, however, is a strange character, and who knows, maybe darkness will be spreading from Castletown, enough for Ralsei to exist outside of it, if he isn't already capable of doing so. He had to get to the computer lab somehow. Ralsei, similar to Sans, clearly knows more than he lets on, which puts him in a great position to be able to judge Chris for their actions, especially on a more meta level than other characters would be able to. Maybe it would finally be revealed what he's been saying to Chris during the time that the player's focus has been on Susie. Now, for the last two candidates, and my personal favorite too. First, the monster, the myth, the legend, Asriel Dreamer. It matches up well with the fact that he'll show up near the end of the game, and the judge scene is near the end. As Chris' brother, it's possible that Asriel knows more about what's going on than other characters do. If he knows about the Dark Worlds, he may have further insight and things to say about what Chris has been doing to them, and the fact that they've created at least one from what we've seen. It could also be interesting characterization into Asriel and his relationship with Chris through the confrontation itself. And the final candidate, who could be even more interesting than Asriel, Chris. That's right, the main character themselves. I can see it now, as you approach the final dark fountain that needs to be closed, Castletown itself. Chris stops and rips the soul out of them, and, for the first time in the entire game, Chris is able to speak their mind to you. They have been the one always there, watching every choice you've made. So who better to give their 2 cents on what you've done, whether it was good or bad? It's a little bit on the fanfiction-y side of speculation, admittedly. Any prospect of having a real conversation with Chris himself is going to be hard to envision, but I think in this moment it could work out when used for this reason. And that's my thought on Deltarune's Judgment Hall. Again, I cannot recommend checking out A Little Harder Than That's Post Enough, as she talks a bit more about what the Judgment Hall represents and its place in the story, and some other parallels that I didn't mention here, as well as her own ideas for what would make certain characters good judges. Now, will there be a judgment scene in Deltarune? Personally, I'm sold. If you have any thoughts for or against it, or any judge candidates, drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And I hope you have a wonderful day.